Hi, I'm Charles Johnson. I'm a fellow of the Society of Actuaries. I'm a professor at University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, and I'm the CEO of the Actuarial Development Institute. I'm here with Neysa, one of the students from my class, and I'll let her introduce herself.
I'm Neysa, obviously his favorite student. That's why I'm here right now. I'm currently going to be a junior at UWM, and I'm studying actuarial science and then double majoring in economics as well.
I love it. And so you just recently switched to the actuarial science major, so we thought it would be a good and fun
Yes.
conversation to talk about some of the things that you're learning and want to know about the actuarial field.
Correct, because I kind of blindly switched and knew nothing about it, but here I am.
Tell me about that. What do you mean blindly switch?
So I was in a meeting. I was with my advisor. I was like, I don't know what I want to do. I know I like math. That was it. That was the bulk of the conversation. I was maybe going to go into accounting, maybe finance. But she was like, I have this super duper niche major that you could go into called actuarial science. And I was like, okay. And then I just switched. And then that was that.
That's so weird because that's almost identical to how I was a psychology major.
Yeah.
And I decided I didn't want to get my master's or my PhD. So I went to my advisor and I was like, I'm going to be an engineer.
Not for you.
And she was like, well, if you're good at math, I have this super niche math major.
Right.
I had two important questions, though.
What were the two important questions?
How likely am I going to get a job if I graduate? And then how much money am I going to make? And she said, you should make...
Millions.
Well, eventually, over my career. But, she said 6 figures within a couple of years out of school. And I was basically guaranteed a job if I could make it to graduation.
Was that realistic? Do you feel like right out of college you were making good money and found
I actually get that question a lot from students about like how do you make a lot of money early on. And I made I don't know if it was intentional, but a really good financial decision, which was I chose to live in an area that was really affordable when I graduated. So I got an actuarial salary and I lived in a place that had really low cost of living.
Yeah. So how's being an actuary going for you right now? Are you still doing it full time?
No, I'm not practicing right now. I practiced for 10 years. So I did all the things that actuaries traditionally do. I did reserving, I did pricing, modeling, I worked on regulatory compliance, capital standards, I helped build technology, I did compliance with emerging regulations, I worked on the investment side. And kind of after spending 10 years doing all that, I wanted to do something different. And so that's how the Actuarial Development Institute got started.
Going into your career, did you know how to do, what was your skill set? What were the most important things that you felt translated to the career itself?
Yeah, that's a good question. My first internship, I spent almost the entire time writing code. When I was in college, I took basic intro-level Java classes. I think a lot of students have this question around what technical skills should I have and how do I build them? And obviously taking higher level coding classes and learning specific technical skills helps you early in your career. But for the most part, wherever you start, you're probably not going to have a lot of experience in that specific coding language or that specific experience. There's just so many different kinds of software and so many different coding languages. It's impractical usually to expect students to know. So when my first project was writing in MATLAB. And
it's a MATLAB.
MATLAB is a computer programming language. It's similar to maybe SAS or SPSS. It's specifically designed for manipulating large data sets. And I had never coded in MATLAB. The company I worked for, the only person who had ever written in MATLAB was my boss, and probably 4 to 6 weeks into my internship, I was the foremost expert on that specific coding language. So I spent a lot of my time Googling things, reading forums. Unfortunately, when I was an intern, AI didn't exist to help troubleshoot and problem solve.
No ChatGPT.
No. As I use it now to solve coding problems and challenges, it's pretty insane how much more quickly you can find solutions and tackle technological problems when it comes to coding early in your career. So in terms of the skill sets I had that made me be successful, I think it was, the number one thing is just interest and willing to learn, right? You just have to want to dig into problems. You have to be excited by your work. I ran internship programs, and it's amazing the difference between success and not success for most people that work, and it's not just actuarial but anywhere, is how much do you enjoy the work. Like the prerequisite skills matter a lot, but especially in entry level roles, the exponential growth curve of knowledge, it's how quickly can you get up that curve. And being smart helps, no doubt, but if you're doing something that doesn't interest you or excite you, if your eyes glaze over when you're working on a specific problem, like you're just not going to get up that curve as fast as people who are interested.
Did you feel like you were always interested in doing it? Like when you got your first project on the job, was it something that was ideally sparked your interest and you enjoyed doing it right off the bat, or did you feel like your interest grew as you understood more?
It's a good question. I think I liked the problem-solving nature. It's not so much that so let me take a step back.
Yeah.
My first coding project was we were pricing insurance, life insurance, and we were trying to figure out how competitive our products were compared to all the other products that are sold. And in insurance, I'm sure you're familiar with it. Like, let's take car insurance.
Yeah.
It depends on the kind of car that you have. It depends where you're driving, what age you are, what sex you are, right? And so when you are trying to compare your pricing to someone else's, it gets complicated, right? Because every single, possible price might vary. Maybe you're more competitive with women than men. You're more competitive with high-end cars than you are, cars that drive every day. And so the software I designed was supposed to, you could select different companies to compare against, and then you could look at different breakouts. Like on average across, the groups of policies we sold, are we more competitive in specific age demographics? So it had to be pretty flexible. So I liked that I was doing something that was totally novel, right? I had never done it before, so every day my skill set was growing, pretty rapidly. I was encountering challenges that required logic to solve, right? I think with different professions, sometimes the challenges you face might be, cultural or social. Maybe you're selling something, or maybe it's, you're not even solving problems. You're just doing work, delivering food or cutting grass. But in the actuarial field, the problems you encounter require intelligent solutions. So I enjoyed the critical thinking nature of it, the fact that I was mentally challenged, and that kept me coming back. It's like doing games or math problems. Right? They're puzzles that you get to figure out on a daily basis. So.
Is that why you decided to start your own company? Did you feel like you peaked in the position you were at, or?
I don't know if peaked is the right word. Certainly, as you progress forward in your career, I said there's that exponential curve. Yeah. Right, where you grow really fast at the beginning, and then it starts to taper. And after having done, like 6 or 7 roles, I got into a role that I had done before, and you certainly continue to learn anywhere you go. Yeah. But I just didn't feel that same level of challenge and excitement around the problems I was solving. I was leveraging skills I already had. The project timelines were really long, and so I felt like I wanted to develop skill sets beyond the technical, and I didn't have an opportunity to do that in kind of the large corporate actuarial environment I'm in. Yeah. That doesn't mean that there's not other actuarial roles, and in fact, when I quit my job to start the Actuarial Development Institute, it was opportunistic, not intentional. Like, I didn't quit going like, I need to start my own company. Yeah. I was presented a very unique opportunity to pursue something like this that I might not get a chance to again in my life. And there are certainly actuarial roles that have a blend of skill sets beyond the technical. I mean, I think consulting B2B sales is a great example. You can spend 10 years being an excellent consultant, but when you want to get to the next level, it's going to be around client relationships and the ability to sell services and to maintain contracts and upsell people. So there's definitely opportunities within the actuarial world to build some of the skill sets that I wanted to build, that I'm working on building right now. Yeah. So let me ask you, you just took your first actuarial class? Yeah. And you got the UEC from it? I did get the UEC. Tell me about the experience of going through
the class?
The class?
Awful. It was First 2 weeks, I think I wanted to quit, and I was genuinely considering dropping the class. It was definitely a culture shock.
Let's be clear that you took 2 classes and only one of them was taught by me.
Only one was taught by him, and he was extra confusing just as well. I think we just don't think alike, and that might be... I think that was probably the biggest thing that I learned, is you have to find what works for you, what study methods work for you. I think the time commitment, I didn't necessarily realize right off the bat how much I would have to spend outside of class, like outside of the classroom, studying on my own, really locking in and trying to get to know the material as much as I could. So I would say like the first month of being in that class was awful. You're learning so much. It's like learning a new language. Like there's so much thrown at you, so many different equations, and it's very overwhelming, but I got through it. I'm here now.
Yeah. You know, it's funny, on our first day of class, I told you that, didn't I?
Yeah, you did, and I didn't listen.
Yeah, no, it's, I find that so interesting because I had the same experience again.
Yeah.
To be people like us that are generally have high natural propensity for math.
Yes.
We've taken hard math courses.
I don't think I ever developed any actual skills though, because everything just came naturally to me.
Yeah.
So this was the first time that I actually struggled in a class, and I was not used to being like a loser. I remember I told you that. I was like, I'm not used to not being the best or being good or having to put in an extra amount of work to be successful in what I was doing. It always came natural, and that was very, very hard for me at first to figure out a balance of what was going to help me.
I'm curious, when we were in class, I read to you guys like an article I had written about the thirds in class. Yeah. And so I'll just rehash it real quick.
Yeah.
The idea is if you look at the dropout rates of colleges from really high quality schools like Harvard to middle tier schools, the dropout rates of people who perform in the bottom third of classes is about the same regardless of the institution. Yeah. Even though the people who go to Harvard have very high ACT and SAT scores, 4.0 GPAs, if you're in the bottom third of a class, your likeliness of feeling like you don't belong and quitting is still pretty high. Yeah. Because our experience and our value that we view of ourselves is relative to our immediate peers. And the reason I brought that up in class is, because of conversations like what I had with you. Yeah. I know that the people in that class are exceptionally talented. And if we compare ourselves, the members of our class to anyone outside of that room, you're going to be
on top.
Yeah, you're going to be on top. You've done that your whole life. And yet, because you're struggling in this class for the first time ever, you feel like you don't belong. And so I was curious, when you got to that where you're like, oh.
I think when you pointed it out, I was like, oh, I'm definitely bottom tier. There's just no way. I'm failing. I'm probably going to drop out at some point. I will say, I started doing this thing in my head where I started comparing myself to every person in the class. And I was like, okay, I don't think I'm low of low. There's maybe like 2 people below me, but it's fine. Like I could probably smile my way through it and be fine. Like it'll be okay. Like I'll make it through. But I was definitely struggling that first month and definitely considering leaving, but I said you were the one thing that made me stay.
I was?
Yeah.
Okay, before let me just, I want to go back to this. You viewed yourself in the bottom third.
Yeah.
But you got UEC, and maybe just for a minute, let's talk about what UEC is.
UEC is University Earned Credit. So normally when you're studying for an exam, you have to sit for it. You have to go in person, sit, take the exam. It's a 3-hour exam, 30 questions. Everyone's got to do it to get the credit. Yeah. University Earned Credit is basically a class. It's a course that you can take it's in addition to it. And it's basically, you take it the entire semester, and at the end of the course, you take the final exam, and basically you can get exempt from taking the exam, so you don't have to go and sit instead. Yeah. But you have to hit like a certain level.
You have to get a certain grade in the class and a certain grade on the final exam.
Correct.
Yes. Okay. So
get it.
You got it, and a lot of people
did
didn't.
It.
Okay. So you get your first month in.
Yeah.
You're realizing that it doesn't come as naturally as all the other math. You're comparing yourself to kids in class, thinking, oh, maybe I am in the bottom third. Yeah. You didn't perform in the bottom third, though.
No.
Right? To get UEC, clearly you were at least in the top half. What was the turning point for you? Like where you felt like, oh, I'm now starting to get this, and why do you think that you maybe grew in that second half of class more than everyone else did?
I think I spent the first half of the course a little bit in denial. I think in my head, I was doing the homework, I was showing up, and that's good enough. Mm-hmm. That's good enough. I'm here. Just being present is worth it. Like that's gonna make me successful. Sitting and taking like the very first exam in your class and then Mohammed's class. Failed both of them. Like aggressively failed it. I was looking at the average, scored way below that. I was like, no, this is, and I genuinely, I think that was my turning point. I was like, okay, no, I need to be doing more. If this is something that I want and I see myself doing in the future, then I'm going to have to put in a lot more effort, which is something that I was kind of running from because no one wants to study an additional 3 hours, 4 hours outside of classroom time and dedicate their whole life to math. But I did it for a little bit and it worked. So I think it was just being a failure. Like I had to fail. I needed to look at something physically and see that I was a failure to make myself stay motivated.
I actually did drop the first time I took the class, the financial mathematics class. And I remember studying for my first exam, I studied the probability exam first, and we could probably talk about those exams in a bit. What are they and what's on them? But I remember studying for the P exam, and I wasn't as familiar with like study materials, things like coaching actuaries that really give you a huge edge. Imagine going through and doing what you did and not having resources like that.
Yeah.
So I was studying for my first exam, and I was using this textbook that we had in class, and I was rereading sections and doing. And I remember taking a practice exam from like a physical manual I checked out in the library a month before I sat for P, and I got over half the problems wrong, and thinking like, oh no, like I was studying every day and I still was like I'm
not
it's like clearly not working. But like you, I just said like, well, I'm gonna sit, I'm registered, I have 3 to 4 weeks, why don't I'm just gonna go extra hard. And I sat and I did practice exams every day, and I remember this turning point like maybe 5 days before a sitting. I think that's another thing that really is a mental challenge for a lot of people, is that you got UEC, but I think the exams, I would argue, are probably a little bit harder. They're certainly different. And maybe we can talk a little bit about what your UEC exam was like versus what a traditional exam was like. But preparing for an exam, you're not prepared for almost the entire time, right? If you study for like 3 months, 2.5 of those months for sure you're not ready to, you're not going to pass. And so it's really the just often the last couple of days before you sit where things kind of wholly come together, and you rise to the capability necessary to pass. And once I broke through that kind of ceiling and I got to, I get it now. Like I'm getting enough questions right that I might pass. Then I sat and passed for the exam. I think I walked away from that, like you, not that long before, never having to really put any effort and realizing how capable, how much I could achieve if I put in the effort. And that's really what the Actuarial Development Institute is about, is helping people break through and realize that if you put in a lot of effort, especially if you have high natural propensity where you probably haven't been challenged yet in your life, like you've been through 19, 20 years of your life where you haven't really been intellectually challenged in a way that you have to put in daily work for weeks or months at a time. But then once you realize how much you're capable of, like you have your whole life to leverage that and to continue building on that. And so it's exciting to see people like you break through that and realize it. It was
great. I think getting coaching actuaries and using it was very, very beneficial. I mean, it has the entire coursework. There's videos, there's past examples. I mean, you can go back and look at all the material multiple times, and that really, really helped. There's different levels, so you don't have to do the super hard ones at first and feel like a failure even more. You can just kind of work your way up, which is nice. But also like the commitment, I think also staying consistent. You always said do 15 minutes a day, 15 minutes a day. Never did that. Maybe that's why I felt the first half. But I started doing that, and it really did. I think things started clicking in my head, and I started feeling I was retaining more information.
Yeah, I'm always surprised when people don't believe me, because I think
because no one wants to do it. Who wants to sit for 15 minutes like every day and just like, I'm gonna be on my computer, I'm just gonna look at math problems for an hour. We said an hour a day, was it? An hour a day, not 15 minutes.
That's generally my rule of thumb. Yeah, but I'm a believer. Just start.
Yeah.
Right. Like if you can get an hour, great. But if you're like, I can't do an hour, 5 minutes is good.
It feels like a chore. I think in your head, and you're like, I need to do this, rather than it's going to help me do this. So it's changing my mindset from. But
we have this experience in everything else we do, like playing musical instruments or playing sports, or even like, you know, lifting in the gym. We know that being consistent and the intensity that we train, generally that's how we improve over time. And so I'm always surprised when people get to something like hard mathematics and they're like, oh, I don't want to use those same rules that have made me successful in all the other parts of my life.
Well, majority of people at this point, like they, especially in like school, they didn't have to try it like as hard, or even just, especially because I came out of COVID. So majority of my high school experience was online. So we lost a lot of that super, like you're not in class, no one's watching what you're doing, you're not getting scored based on what, like you're actually, I don't know, like your skill set, you're being scored on just being present. So I think a lot of people came into college, especially this group of us, just showing up would be good enough, and it's not. So yeah.
Are you grateful
for what?
That you like went through that experience? Are you look back on it like, oh, that was trauma?
What, taking the class?
Taking the class, or are you like, oh, well...
No, it was trauma 1,000%. I wouldn't go back and do it ever. I'm literally
but
never...
you have to, right? Like, you're going to continue taking classes and continue taking exams.
I think my brain's a little bit more prepared now for what's going to hit me.
Yeah.
Ish. I mean, it's going to get harder, but...
Yeah, talk about that transition. So now you're studying for your first exam.
Yeah.
Without a UEC. There's no UEC for
No, I don't think there is.
There's not.
And that's terrifying. I don't want to go sit, but it's like inevitable. It's going to happen.
Yeah.
It's a lot harder. I will say, I think I'm a little bit more focused when I have an actual teacher, professor standing in front of me. I mean, every day you go into class and they're saying, okay, you need to look at the material, you need to study, but now you're on your own. So you're just, it's completely up to you. I mean, whether or not I study, whether or not I'm looking at the material, doesn't, like, no one's there to keep you in check. So that, I think, is probably the hardest part of it. It's just staying motivated and actually retaining the content, I guess. Because you can go through and like click through everything and like maybe retake the problems, but it's like, are you actually learning anything? Am I actually learning anything, or am I just kind of going through the motions of it?
But when you study, what do you find is the most effective way to like learn a new concept?
First, I look at it. I mean, I look at the videos, I watch them, I write down the equations. And I think the biggest thing for me is I just do all the practice problems. Like, I need to get them wrong. I need to like conceptually understand what's happening first before I can move on to the next topic.
We talked about that in class too.
Because I mean, you can memorize whatever you want. You can memorize a formula, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to go into the exam and know what you're doing. Because you're going to have to use 15 different formulas for a problem one time. So.
Yeah, one of the things I think I mentioned in class, but I break down, is that there's really 3 skill sets that you need to pass exams. Like, one of them is, like the first one, and this is probably the most challenging, is like being able to read a problem and know what it's asking. Yeah. I think people hear multiple choice math test, and they're like, how could that possibly be that difficult, right? Like, just like check which answers work. No. But most of the time when you read an actuarial exam question, it takes a long time just to figure out, like, what do they even want to know? You're
looking at it and you're like, what even is the question? Like, what are you asking me right now? What is this?
And I think that's probably the hardest part. And then you need I can recall the formulas. Right. And then the third one, which again, I think is a shock to a lot of people, is that the calculators have a bunch of tools that you need to learn how to use.
And I didn't know how to use that at all for the first time of the class.
And much like a lot of it, it's not intuitive. Like, the calculators are not an intuitive tool to use. And so I think
you put in like negatives and you're like, I thought this was a positive number.
And the order of operations is weird. Yeah. So I empathize with the challenges that you come with the student beyond just like, oh, I'm memorizing formulas, and the depth of knowledge is different. And so I want to talk just a second about why that is. Right? I think the actuarial societies do it intentionally because you don't realize it now, but the first two exams, the probability and the financial mathematics exams, are intro baseline concepts for the rest. All the other conceptual, the preliminary exams, are going to build on the concepts of those two. So you really genuinely need like a pretty deep understanding of what those concepts are.
It's like a critical thinking. It's what they're trying to get you to do.
Well, so I'll give you an example. So the first exam, we'll call it the financial mathematics exam. That's the class I taught. That's, you got the UEC for. That's a study of time value of money. The premise being money is worth different amounts in the future and in the past. And I think intuitive we think of like maybe about inflation. Like, oh, and a dollar, tomorrow will be inflated. So if I just hold the dollar, it'll be worth less because I can buy less. But time value of money is more about opportunity. It's the idea that by giving up $1 now, I'm giving up the opportunity to use it later. So if I'm going to use it later, I want more value because I'm giving up an opportunity, not just waiting. And the financial mathematics, we can maybe do that with $1 today and $1 in 9 years or 10 years. But the whole premise of the FM exam is how do you value streams of cash flows? $1 today, $5 tomorrow, then negative, like I give and then I get receive and then I give. And so it's looking at how do you take all of these different kinds of cash flow streams and value them at different points in time. So how much is it worth today? How much is it supposed to be worth 10 years ago? And this fundamental understanding that money's value changes over time, like you said, you went through the class. It's not intuitive.
No.
It's not an intuitive concept in the same way that, maybe geometric proofs might be, where, there's this logical step from one step to the next. Obviously there's proofs in that get you to the financial mathematics, but it's the deeper conceptual understanding of valuing cash flows. So that's just FM. That's just the introduction, and it's incredibly hard.
The first one.
Yeah, and it's incredibly hard and challenging.
I hate thinking about the fact that we have so many more exams. You pass one, you're like, yay! There's like so many. How many are there in total? How many exams?
So right now, if you look at just the preliminary exams, there's like 7 or 8, depending on where you go. And then after that, that's to get your associateship. And then after that, to get your fellowship, to be like a specialist, you take 3 more exams. And those exams are all written, and they're about like products. So maybe about enterprise risk management or investments or life insurance or health insurance.
How do you know where you want to specialize? Is that something that you just knew right off the bat, or you just kind of...
That's a good question. Most people don't get to those fellowship exams until they've been working for 3 to 7 years.
So it comes later.
Yeah, okay. So generally you pick a specialty that aligns with what you're currently doing. Or if maybe you work in a big corporation and there's a couple different options like enterprise risk management or corporate investments, you can pick the track that kind of aligns with what you'd like to learn or value you think that you can bring to the organization you're with.
Okay, that makes sense. Where did you start off at?
Like my first roll out of college.
Yeah.
I started at State Farm working for their life insurance department. So I like that we had such a similar experience. So I switched majors.
Yeah.
I was very intimidated when I took my first exam, and I was lucky that I passed. But once I'd figured out that process of like self-studying, and I felt so empowered that I had control all of a sudden about my future and where I was going, I followed the rule that I advocate, which is I pass an exam and then 2 weeks later I start studying for my next one. So by the time I had graduated college, all of the preliminary exams, which at my time was only 5, I passed all 5 of them.
Before you graduated?
Before I graduated college.
Is that normal, or is that...
No, I probably know 5 people, I think, that have passed all of them before graduating.
What would you say is a normal timeline for an average student that's in the program?
That's I think historically it's been like 3 to 5 years.
Okay.
So mine from first pass to last was just under 2.
Okay.
But students now are in a much more challenging position. So let's take our class, for example. We had, we'll say, 3 or 4 students who were freshmen. And let's imagine that by the time they start their sophomore year, they either get UEC or pass the FM exam. They only have one more exam that qualifies for both the CAS and the SOA. So either one, they have to commit to a certain path, like I'm going the SOA route or the CAS route to continue taking exams, or they risk taking exams that might not qualify for the path that they want to go down. So for me, when I was in school, all 5 of the preliminary exams qualified for both sides.
Lucky.
Yes, and when I took my internship, I was pretty convinced I wanted to work in life insurance. I liked looking at the long term. I liked the impact of economics and the financial world on it. And also it's the largest employer. It has the most jobs. And so I was like, that's where I want to go. So I was pretty sure that was the route I wanted to take. But for students now, I would say that especially if you're passing your exams early, which is good to get internships and job opportunities, rushing through the exams is not necessarily, there's risks along with it that you might waste time. I mean, obviously you're learning useful stuff, but studying for exams is hard. It's not the most fun activity.
What's the difference between CAS and SOA?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's funny. I think it's so ironic. So the CAS, which is the Casualty Actuary Society, today it focuses on property and casualty, which is stuff.
Just
stuff that, like, physical things, right? Like cars, homes, auto or RVs, motorcycles, planes, right? That's all property. And then casualty is around, like, liability. So think about it when you buy car insurance. You have 2 different coverages. One is you can choose to cover your car. Like if you get in a car accident, they'll replace damage to your car, buy you a new car. But you're also required, and this is the important one, to have liability, meaning that if I do damage to someone else, my insurance will pay what I owe someone else. So liability can be really broad. I mean, that can be health, right? Like, I get in an accident and I physically injure someone. So that's healthcare costs associated with it. But the reason I find it ironic is that this Casualty Actuary Society started with workers' comp. That was the first one.
Workers' comp?
That was the first one where they were like, we're going to cover this. I find workers' comp to be a very health insurance-like product.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's usually health-related. And its payments are often longer duration. So it just seems more naturally under the SOA side. SOA side is the Society of Actuaries. It's the largest actuarial organization in the world, and it's basically everything that isn't P&C. So it does life insurance, it does health insurance, it does a lot of investments, enterprise risk management, disability insurance, long-term care, and so the SOA tends to focus on longer duration stuff, except healthcare, which is also very P&C like, meaning that you offer coverage for a short period of time, you only pay for claims that occur during that time of coverage. So there's a lot of overlap conceptually between them. But the defining line is usually CAS is property and casualty, home, auto, business, that's P&C, and then SOA is life, health, pensions, investments, things that are much longer duration and involve more specifically finance.
When looking at an internship for the first time, is that something that you should be considering? I mean, if you're
one, just get an
just
offer.
Get one, yeah.
Just get one, and go from there. If you're fortunate enough to get multiple offers, which is challenging to do, but lots of people that happens to. I would focus more on organization than practice area, and I think that when you go to do the work, you can evaluate how much you enjoy it. Property casualty, because you're covering things in short periods of time, you tend to focus a lot on trends. What is the most recent data that we got in the last couple months? How is it different than the past? And how do we think it's going to predict the future? So there's a lot of predictive analytics, automated modeling, machine learning that goes into P&C because we're covering very short periods of time. On the SOA side, particularly with life insurance or annuities or long-term care, where you're looking at things that, the guarantees, the promises we're making aren't for a really long time, you think a lot more about economics. What's the interest rate environment like right now? How might, things change in 20 years or 30 years? And not just how will they change, but how do I design products to protect the consumer and the company, right? We want the consumer to be taken care of, to be protected, regardless of what happens in the future. But, we only fulfill those promises if the company stays solvent. So how do you also make sure that the company can protect itself in any given environment? And so what my favorite example is, when I worked at State Farm, I did economic capital. It's a fancy word. It basically means, we want to set aside extra money just in case. And what I got to do was I got to look at just in case. So if you're a life insurance company, what are the biggest risks to it? So one of them was, a big economic downturn. So interest rates go down, the stock market crashes, the economy slows. Like, what are the
depression?
Yeah. So how would that affect our investments? Because investments are an important part of long duration. The second one is, what could cause a bunch of losses at the same time? So on the P&C side, there's a big national one, like floods. No one wants to cover floods. The government has to cover floods. And the reason is that when a flood happens, it damages a lot of homes at exactly the same time, which is really bad for an insurance company. Right? Very rarely do you have a bunch of car accidents at the same time. Maybe you have one pileup or something like that. But it's not like 10% of all the cars get destroyed in one day. But that's what happens with floods. So you think about that in life insurance. And so when I was at State Farm, our big one was like, oh, well, we have a convention where all of our agents are in the same location.
Okay.
Yeah. Northwestern Mutual has one in Milwaukee every year. All the agents, and they have the big long pants.
It's so weird. They're like wearing a ribbon, like a.
Hey, that's they've worked their whole career for that.
Yeah, for that.
For the ribbons. And so, we looked like what happens if there's an event or something that impacts, because our agents buy a lot of our insurance. But the third one we looked at was, well, what if a pandemic happens? I know, but we looked at it every single year because we knew that that's happened in the past and that it would impact our book, and we wanted to make sure that we stayed solvent no matter what happened.
So you predict the future. That's what you were doing.
That's all actuaries do. That's our job. Is predicting. I think you think like weathermen, like you're No, you are. You're trying to figure out. What we're trying to figure out is estimate an amount and then make sure that even if we're wrong, that we're still safe.
A dollar amount on future risks is essentially what.
A dollar amount on future risk. Yes, that's exactly right.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, it's like betting. We do it all the time with betting, right? Like, give me money, and then some betting person's like, okay, well, here's how much I'll pay you if that team wins.
Yeah.
It's insurance. It's exactly the same. It's exactly the same. You're gambling all life. But there's one extremely important rule in insurance, and it's called subrogation. Are you familiar with this term?
No, I'm just nodding and saying it.
Okay. So subrogation is paying back loss. So when people, have this idea of like, oh, I'm going to rip off an insurance company, unless you're committing fraud, you can only get paid from an insurance company equivalent or less than the loss you experienced. So like, imagine you're driving your car and you total your car. No company will pay you more than your car is worth. Right? Correct. So you're still out of car.
Yeah, you don't have
like, oh, I got a check from the insurance company. We might as well have sold your car. It's the same thing with disability insurance, right? If I become disabled, my coverage cannot be more than my salary was.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So the coverage that's what you don't want to over subrogate. You don't ever want to pay someone back more than their losses are. Otherwise, they have an incentive like, oh, I'm just going to go take the loss
and then
get
just,
the money.
Right.
Yes.
More at the end of the day.
So we always want to make sure people don't intentionally create loss. But what's interesting, my head professor used to talk about this all the time. Insurance's purpose is not to reduce risk, though. It's actually to increase risk taking.
Because you make money based off of
No,
that,
because your downside is taken away. Right? So like, I'm willing to go and drive everywhere because I'm not worried that if I get in a car accident, I'll lose all of my money.
Got it, yeah.
Right? I know that I'm protected if that happens. Like I'm not constantly paranoid and worried about my house because I know if something happens, it's protected.
Yeah.
And so that's really what insurance does, is it protects the bad things that might happen so that you're open and willing to take risks. And again, so if you look at the Society of Actuaries, their catchphrase is, risk is opportunity. And that's being able to take risks is what allows growth. That's what entrepreneurship is. I mean, that's what I'm doing by quitting my job and starting a company. I'm taking risk. But within those risks, there's bad things. That's risk, right? It's a distribution. There's bad and there's good. And the more risk you take, the more opportunities there are for really good things to happen, just like there are bad. And insurance tries to take the bad things away so that you can really pursue and possibly achieve great things.
Do you feel like you've achieved great things?
I don't think about life like that.
No? You don't
no.
base it off of your achievements, like what you've accomplished already? Or you're always just in a growth mindset? You're always trying to make it better?
I read a book called Stillness is the Key, and one of the most profound things in that book was a chapter called Enough. And it changed the way I thought about my career and my accomplishments. I think a lot of us, when we go to our day jobs, when you sit in class, you think about, well, how well is someone else doing? Are they getting promoted? Did they do better than me on that test? And you get this comparative state of like, my value is attached to the relativeness of someone else, right? And so like, have I accomplished something? Well, relative to who, right? Like, by one standard, I'm a credentialed actuary, and I have a wonderful family and a house that's safe and has comfortable and food. Right. Like that's for a lot of people, that's immensely successful. But are there actuaries that are more successful than I am by lots of metrics? Sure. Yeah. So I don't think about myself like as success is happiness. The whole premise of Enough, and it actually talks about Tiger Woods and his relationship with his father. Right.
The golfer?
Yeah, because his father used to take him golfing, and he was rough on him. He would jingle keys in his pockets and yell slurs at him while he was teeing off, trying to prepare him mentally for what it would be like playing at the highest level. And they had a safe word that if Tiger ever said it, that his father would stop, and Tiger never said the word, and the word was enough. And then you look at Tiger's career, Tiger just didn't stop playing well because he was infidelitous. Tiger stopped playing well because at 30, in his 30s, being the world's best golfer, he decided he wanted to start training for special forces in the Army and injured himself jumping out of a plane and then doing bomb sweep drills. Right? Like that's a ridiculous, insatiable, I'm not enough, I need to accomplish more. And that permeated lots of decisions that he made in his life. And so when I read this, it just occurred to me, like, if I am measuring how well I'm doing relative to my peers, I'm letting someone else control my happiness. And so I don't think about my life like, how successful am I? I think like, am I fulfilled? Am I living by the values that I hold? Am I doing something that I feel is worthwhile? Am I able to provide sufficiently for the people I most greatly care about? And I think that is 10 times more important to me than, am I successful?
When going into your career, how do you find a company that is going to fulfill all of your future wants? And
I don't know if you can.
No?
Well,
I mean, what things did you look at when you're trying to find a company that you feel is going to fit you?
Location. I mean, so that was 90. It's so, when I graduated, so I went to Pac Life, California.
Okay, so you're not from Wisconsin at all?
I'm from Illinois.
Okay.
But I interned at Pac Life, California, great company, beautiful. But I was like, it's expensive to live there. It's far away. And I was dating someone at the time who got a job in Central Illinois, so that's where I got a job. And then, that didn't work out, but I met my wife.
Right.
She got into grad school in Madison. So, there were companies that wrote me offers when I was moving to Wisconsin. But I wanted to work at Northwestern Mutual because when I was in the room at State Farm and we were trying to figure out how to be more competitive, Northwestern Mutual was like the standard with which we measured ourselves against. We looked at what they were doing and we said, like, how do they do that? And so, they were a mutual company, which, I meant to me, they didn't have like job cuts. They tended to be able to look at longer term decision making. And that they had, that at the end of the day, their financial decisions were mostly driven by what was best for the policyholder, not shareholders. They weren't, the number of stakeholders were minimal, so they could be more aligned with what I felt like if you're selling someone a product, you really want to do what's right for them. So for me, that was what I wanted. I wanted a stable job that had good values, that I felt was, somewhere I'd be proud to work, to talk about, because I knew the things that they stood for and the things that they did. Looking back on it in my career, I really wish I'd have had an opportunity to work in the consulting world. My technical skills and my math is competent, but one of my best skills is my ability to network and to sell.
I always told you that you were aggressively social. That was the first thing I told you.
You and the students like to roast me in class, and I'm aggressively. So to say that how do you find the right company for yourself? On one hand, just like try to get offers and be the most qualified. Give yourself as many opportunities and options as you can, and then pick where you think you want and what you think is best for you. And how many major corporations have you worked for?
0.
Yeah, so I think you'll learn, one, as you work, what you like and don't like, and it's hard to know that without experience. And then 2, your life's going to change. The things that matter to you is going to change over time, and so you just have to listen to yourself, right? How much, and reflect, is this really bringing me happiness, joy, where I want monetarily on a satisfaction basis? Maybe living near your parents ends up being a really important factor to you at some point in your life. Right, so I don't think there's a one size fits all. Like, how do you find the right company out of college? Give yourself as many opportunities as you can. Pick the one that you think is in most alignment, and then just listen to yourself and your experience, and be willing to make adjustments and changes.
Yeah.